Hello Internet, I'm the Disney Brain and welcome to the Girl Meets World review. Last time, we got a really smart part 1 of what has turned out to be a very meta last 2 episodes of season 3. When we talked about Sweet 16, I had a feeling that the minds behind this show were made privy to the unfortunate situation, and after having seen this episode, I'm pretty sure of it. Spoiler warning now, you all know how it goes. With all that said, let's dive deeper into Girl Meets Goodbye. We start things off with Riley and Maya discussing the decision yet to be made by Topanga, and this leads to the mother of all lesson plans. At long last, Belgium 1831. Mr. Matthews was saving this particular lesson, likely for when the cast graduates high school, but unforeseen circumstances, both in the show and in real life, has forced his hand, which we now know to be, or already know if you looked it up before, as Belgium's secession from what was then called the United Kingdom of the Netherlands. A pretty simple metaphor for the tearing apart of the unity this friend group has grown accustomed to, with Riley and the Matthews family possibly leaving, which also probably serves as the metaphor for how the cast and crew were feeling when cancellation became a possibility. If this was to be the last episode of Girl Meets World, and based on what I'm seeing, there's a definite chance it won't be, but if it is, let it be known that for as much as I usually can't stand Ava and her frenemy relationship with Topanga, she went out on a definite high note. Sure, her fake accent is kind of grating, but it stems from the genuine feelings she has for Augie. And even though their dynamic isn't given as much focus as the central friendships and relationships of this show, it's more clear here than ever that these two losing each other would be just as painful for the both of them, and their bay window scene is an absolute highlight. The episode itself expresses how even the youngest of perspectives matter, and they back that up here by giving us the best look at Augie and Ava as not just a fake married couple, but as friends. But these classroom scenes should not be dismissed out of hand either. The way they frame opportunities using the familiar lens of not just these main characters, but the decisions made in the later stages of Boy Meets World works very well, and almost every main character got to express a valuable perspective on that matter. But I am left wishing that they would have used this chance to allow everyone in the class just one line apiece at least. It's so easy to forget that the lessons that Riley and Maya and the gang learn are also the lessons that Nigel learns, Sarah learns, Darby learns, and even Carrie Abelson? Yeah, sure, why not? And since this episode is pretty self-aware anyways, it could have been a great opportunity to let the mostly voiceless faces of the classroom, well, have a voice, if only for a few seconds apiece, and have them speak from the heart. Now, let's get to the meat of the episode. We've got nearly all of the important Boy Meets World alumni coming in for Topanga's big decision, and seeing them all together is just as awesome as it sounds. Except neither Angela nor Rachel is present, but Harley is here, which kind of makes sense since he's a recurring character in this show too, but he never really interacts with Topanga. And maybe having Angela and Katie both present would have drawn too much focus away from the themes of this episode, cause I don't know about you, but the last thing I want to be talking about is who Sean loved more, especially with how beautiful the adopting Maya moment was. But what makes this reunion, in my estimation, a step above even Home for the Holidays is that we got some nice moments out of the returning character dynamics, namely Eric and Feeny, followed later by Sean and Mr. Turner, finally reuniting for the first time since Cult Fiction way back when. Now there is a lot of stuff, including why there are two Morgans, that won't make a lot of sense to you if you haven't seen the original show, and if you haven't, what are you waiting for? But if you've seen every episode, as I have, you'll get even more out of very specific references, like when Corey mentions the nook her and Topanga wanted for their first home, which ended up being a precursor to the famous bay window. I could talk about the parallels, references, and why the individual involvement of each Boy Meets World alumni matters so much for basically the entire review. I really could. But the one parallel I think is most important is provided by Eric Matthews, a character of immeasurable importance back in the Boy Meets World days, mainly because for all the advice Topanga gets, it's the advice of Eric that she actually uses, and that's what ends up helping her the most in making her decision. But before we get there, we get another powerful scene with the main cast just talking things out. They don't even need to say it, but it still reigns true here. People change people. The secret of life, and our resident geniuses have even found a scientific explanation for it. But more than anything, these moments are just heartfelt and sincere. They really could have dialed up the feels if they wanted to, but I like the composure this scene had to calmly work through the teleplay even under the circumstances. That's not to say that it isn't still affecting, but more than anything, I think the scene shows just how much growing up this cast and these characters have done. I think the composure I mentioned comes from a place of maturity, and I'm glad that even in the waning moments of a season of highs and lows, this show still remembers how important that is in a coming of age series. Getting back to the decision, Topanga goes to her quiet place, as Eric suggests, and she makes up her mind to stay put in New York. The reason that it was so important that Eric be the one to impart the definitive wisdom here is because it parallels his involvement in the later stages of Boy Meets World. The main friend group there was in a rough spot and at risk of going through a more literal parallel to Belgium 1831. In fact, that particular saga shows an alternate timeline wherein Eric's alter ego, Mr. Squirrels, appears for the first time. But back in the real timeline, Eric's passion towards seeing his friends stay together and connected allows them to work things out. And here, Eric's involvement helps save yet another friend group from potentially being torn apart, except this time by factors less within their control. You could also make the argument here that Mr. Feeney referencing Topanga's Corey over Yale decision was just as valuable, but I don't think it creates the same kind of clean parallel that we get from Eric here. And then, we get a flashback to the end of Boy Meets World, and the final parallel that brings it all home. But I think here, it's less about what was similar, and more about what was different. Boy Meets World had an exceptional closing episode, and the perfect closing scene. But there, it was clear that the show was ending, and it did all it needed to do. But here, there's more of the sense of optimism surrounding things, something that was not at all the case in the previous episode, or even the first half of this one for that matter. It really feels like things are gonna be alright. And a few choice moments leading up to this one say as much, but it's here where that sentiment is most felt. The minds behind this show must have known what the deal was before filming this episode, but maybe they also knew that even if they leave one place behind in favor of another, like changing networks for example, that it presents a valuable opportunity. Maybe keeping the gang together was the show telling us and the rest of the world that they refuse to compromise what they've done and continue to do. And maybe, just maybe, that optimism will be rewarded. And that's Girl Meets Goodbye, one of the most resonating episodes yet that gives you some good jokes and a lot of meaningful guest appearances, but never takes the focus off of the central idea of Topanga's choice and how it affects everything and everyone around her. There are numerous really good moments from everyone in the cast here, and they all brought some of their best acting to the table. But really, what can you say? It's just one of those episodes where watching it feels simultaneously good and bad for all the right reasons. Outside of the Boy Meets World references, which you either know or you don't, what more needs to be said about how much it all means, how much impact it's all had, how much it all matters? You guys already know how I feel. I love her, I love her slightly less, just being honest here. I love him, I barely know him. I like him more each and every day. He's kind of awesome, her not so much most of the time, and these two help anchor one of the best sitcoms of all time. The lessons this show teaches aren't just valuable, they are well constructed into the plots of almost every episode. The way this show feels and thinks and understands makes it special in more ways than I possibly have time to describe. Is it the best Disney Channel show of all time? I don't really have a clear answer right now, but I'm sure as hell certain that there's a great argument that could be made to support such a claim. And I know I've gone into ramble mode now and I'm just saying things, but I guess this time around, it would just feel worse to stop. Even though I know I have to at some point. Lord only knows how long I'll talk about this one once her show ends, but even with such a high point ending, I have faith that this isn't it. I believe that the powerful story Rowan says needs to be told in Season 4 will be told, and probably told on Netflix. We've all been tweeting and messaging and calling, and not only are they listening, but Michael Jacobs is also doing his part and getting initial talks going. So, just like the last few moments of Girl Meets Goodbye, a title we'll soon come to see as ironic, I'm staying optimistic about the future and the opportunities thereof. And when Season 4 does air, we'll all be right back here to take on the world together again. This isn't the end. Not yet. It's a new beginning. And until we get there, thanks for watching.
Not yet.